let's do it. Okay, so we'll call the meeting to order, and the first item on the agenda is approving the minutes from June 4th, 2024. Is there a motion?
Move the approval of the minutes of June 4th, 2024 with any modifications.
Is there a second?
Second.
Go through page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Hearing no modifications, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Next, public comment. This is a moment that anybody in the public is free to make any comment or offer any words of wisdom or whatever you want to do at this moment. If is there anybody in the room who wants to make public comment? Eric, is there anybody online?
No one online.
Okay. Stormwater Fund operating and capital budgets fiscal year 2025.
I can kick things off.
Yeah, please.
Reviewing budgets. So we're going to have the 3 enterprise fund budgets for the board's review tonight: stormwater, water, and sewer. These are being considered in the spring instead of during the winter. We've done this the last several years. The board serves as the commissioners of each enterprise fund and approves the budgets. Must do so in order to set utility rates that will be in effect for the new fiscal year. The proposed rates are a component of the budget proposals. The board will be asked to consider formal action on the rates later in the meeting. The board should consider the rates along with its budget review and consensus on the rates as part of reviewing the budgets first. There'll be operating and capital budgets that staff will go through. We'll start off with stormwater.
Great.
Yeah, I have it yet.
Good evening. Christine Doherty, Assistant Director, Public Works. I'm stepping in for a quick minute while Bruce addresses a door here, but I do want to take a quick minute and introduce Lisa Cicchetti. Lisa is our new Stormwater Coordinator who joined us earlier this year, so we're excited to have her on with us, and we'll have her presenting the budget for you today. Take over, Lisa. Yeah, it's all right.
Great job.
Yeah. Bruce, you're like the main comedian. You know, we warmed us up, and now you're ready to take it away.
Well, the good news is the door's locked. I don't know how the hell I did it, but it's locked.
You know.
I never got a key to fit in it, but somehow it's locked. Anyway. All right, well, I know Christine started with introductions. Did she introduce you?
Yep.
All right, and
You're
we're all
ready to
set.
go?
Be my guest.
Yeah, so I'll just go walk through the main changes we're proposing for the stormwater budget. So the first note, when we're looking at revenue, is we're not recommending any changes to the stormwater utility fee. Okay. So that's on page 1 if we're looking at the operating budget. If we move on to page 3, and you look at outside services and consulting services, we're recommending an increase to fund our participation in the Blue program in partnership with the Lake Champlain Sea Grant at UVM. The Blue program supports Williston residents who have stormwater issues on their private property, and they can get a free consultation from the Lake Champlain Sea Grant staff and a free customized report with recommendations on how to manage stormwater on their property. And then we're offering some rebates to support those residents who actually implement those recommended practices. So that's it on page 3. If you move on to page 5 and look at maintenance wages and project labor, we're recommending an increase here so we can transition to doing our own street sweeping. We can get into more details on that a little bit later, but it would require purchasing a sweeper machine, so we can talk about that in the capital budget. But in this budget, under project labor, it would require a $5,000 increase to cover just the highway labor for operating the new street sweeper machine. Then on to page 6, under maintenance operations, First, under stormwater management, including sweeping, there's not a big change in the budget amount here, but this only includes one contracted street sweep during the fall while we work on purchasing our own sweeper and transition into doing that ourselves rather than contracting it out. And then right below that, under culverts, we're recommending an increase to this budget so we can proactively replace culverts, mostly the aging metal culverts around town, ideally before they start to fail. And then a third thing, under maintenance operations, we've added a new budget line to cover the cost of maintaining the street sweeper machine. And that's, I believe, $8,000. So that's it under operating budgets. I don't know, I can move on to capital or?
Yep, you want to
So the main thing here is that we are proposing that we purchase our own street sweeping machine. We've been using a contractor, but there is now only one contractor in the area who offers this, and the price has gone up a lot in the past year. It went from $6,500 to $11,550 per street sweep. In addition to that, in our phosphorus control plan, it's recommended that we increase street sweeping. So when we're looking at our Allen Brook flow restoration plan and phosphorus control plan capital fund, we're proposing that we purchase a used street sweeper with those funds, because that would be the most responsible approach to continue sweeping and actually follow our phosphorus control plan and increase the frequency of street sweeping to have it be once in the spring and 4 times in the fall during leaf drop to reduce the phosphorus flowing into the streams. And just a couple of notes there. This would be the appropriate fund to use for this, one, because this practice is recommended in our phosphorus control plan, and 2, we received some ARPA funds through the Clean Water Initiative at DEC, and it's called the ARPA MS4 Community Formula Grant, which is also for phosphorus reductions. So if we were to make this purchase here, it would be really the only match or leverage we would likely need through that grant. And then the grant funds for that would be over $700,000 that we'd have access to. And then, and also under the capital, but onto Boyer Circle Capital Fund.
Just before we move off the street sweeper, it's important to point out that what Lisa already said, there's one person around. The reason his price went up was he sold to another company. That company has increased the price to $11,000 for one sweep. We're talking about having to do it 5 times a year. So that's $55,000 with a machine purchase, a used one that would last 10 years, $130,000. So we're paying that machine back in 2.5 years. And the funds are available in the Allen Brook Flow Restoration Phosphorus Control Plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep, and it would be really an appropriate use of those funds as it's in our phosphorus control plan to increase street sweeping frequency. And then in the Boyer Circle Capital Fund, we've decreased the amount we're budgeting for that this year, as we really just have one pipe left to line, and we should be doing that in the next year, and then would be done with that project. That covers all of my main points.
So maybe just just because I'm learning how these capital improvement funds work, but it looks like, so the capital improvements that are in the operating budget are they going to a fund, or are they actually being spent in the year?
No, that's, so they're listed in the budget. Mm-hmm. But the sheets are for the capital improvement program, so that program sets aside those numbers or that amount of money underneath that capital program, and that's where that money is spent.
So I think they're
So
going
it's
to the
raised by
fund.
the rate.
Yeah.
Okay. So why is the Boyer Circle one not level? I mean, the rest of them I can understand when you're setting aside $50,000 a year, so that at the end of 6 years you buy a $300,000 piece of equipment. That I get. But what's going on with Boyer Circle? I just am not familiar with it.
Yeah, so that one just decreased because we're almost done with that project, and we know the remaining pipe that needs to be lined will cost about 36,000, and we have a little bit left over, so I'm just adding 30,000 to get us through the last stretch of that project, and then should be done after this fiscal year.
Then won't there be another one, another project?
There will always be another project.
Yeah, hopefully not in Boyer Circle.
Yeah, what Lisa's saying here is that we initially started in Boyer Circle. We were having lots of failures of stormwater pipes. So we worked it out so that we could line those pipes rather than go in and dig them up. They're very deep. And I did a cost benefit, well, not a cost benefit, I did a comparison as to what it would cost to do an open cut and replace those pipes or to have them lined. We had them lined, and that's what the initial one was for, the 178. And then we had one more larger section that wasn't necessarily going to do, but it goes underneath Boyer Circle. We're paving Boyer Circle this year, so it didn't make a lot of sense to leave that one when we were having all these problems with the other ones. So that was done this year. This last one that we're talking about, quite honestly, is right on the side of the road. And if you look at the basins on either end, when I was looking at it, I thought, well, we can do that, we being Public Works with our staff, and it won't cost that much money. Obviously still costs money, but not as much money. What it turned out was, and this is gonna be hard to believe that I'm not infallible, but that the basins were at a certain level, but then, you know, I just looked at it quickly. The ground goes up quite a bit from there. We would have been 10 to 12 feet deep digging those pipes up. Too deep for Public Works to really get into. We had 3 failures in that section of pipe. A company did come in and we put a camera in there. A company came in and fixed the 3 failures with the intent that we would then line the rest of it. And then we would be done in Boyer Circle with it being paved, and hopefully we wouldn't have to touch that stormwater system in there for, we shouldn't have to for years and years to come.
So if there was, I guess my question is, if there was, I think Morgan Parkway was water, wasn't it, not stormwater? So I read these all pretty quick, but say there was another circle in town that was gonna need $250,000 of work. Do we get these big, increases and decreases?
No, we try not to. We try to do exactly what you're asking is we try to schedule those out, and that's why the industrial pump station or the sewer projects all have line items that continue on, or even some of them that come to an end. There's money in there every year until we get to that point that we have enough money to do that project. This was an unusual circumstance.
And one more question, your unrestricted net position, is that the right, are we holding $1.5 million for an emergency, or what's the reason that we don't dip into that number?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. It'll come up a little bit with a sewer fund discussion too this evening, and what we've been thinking about is how to evolve if Select wants to consider a net position policy. We have one for the general fund. We don't want to have one for the enterprise funds. We've asked some neighboring towns. We've done some research to see if there's any kind of benchmarks to look at. We haven't found a really good number yet locally. Connected with a colleague who's looked a little more nationally to see. So trying to utilize that net position is there. It's this enterprise fund. It's essentially profit from the fund that's available to be reinvested and used, but we want to hold a certain amount back too in case there's issues that arise. So my thought with staff over the next year is evolving a net position policy for these enterprise funds. So my thought is that will help these discussions for the select board have a policy to guide where that benchmark is. The general fund has a 10 to 20% benchmark for the unassigned fund balance.
Okay, so there's at least 2 reasons to keep a what do we call these, a net position. One would be because you're not sure of your revenue, but I'm pretty sure this revenue is pretty stable, so that wouldn't be it. And the other would be for an emergency. $1.5 million is probably, $1 million is probably not unusual for what you might want to keep for an emergency, I guess, but yeah. I just wasn't sure if we knew why we were keeping it.
I've seen some of the national benchmarks. We're thinking at least having 12 months of your operating expenses for an enterprise fund. Yeah, we've talked about it a little bit. We've thought about, okay, if we think about all our assets and depreciating them and thinking about replacement costs, but we would never have a fund balance to replace, say, the whole sewer system, including
Right.
our ownership in the plant. So I think trying to decide how to right-size it for the board will be helpful in some of these discussions moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, if you're building a sinking fund, but you also have a capital fund that, for the same purpose, you don't want that either, so. I mean, if we're saving this money because we're gonna need it to do a project, then we should be putting it in a capital fund like the others, I think. So,
Yeah, I think we can gain a greater understanding of how we want to set those benchmarks in the future.
okay. But the net is, we're not increasing the fees this year on revenue.
Correct.
We haven't increased the fees in the stormwater utility since its inception. So,
Okay,
What determines the streets that have the stormwater? I mean, we must have several miles of streets that
I have what, I'm sorry?
have the stormwater drainage that require the sweeping?
The curved streets get street sweeping because they have the closed drainage with catch basins, and storm
Curb
drains.
streets that have catch basins?
Yeah, otherwise it would be open drainage with the ditches on the side of the road, and you would just be sweeping into those, which would happen anyway.
How many miles of streets in the town do we maintain with that?
Street sweeping, I think, is 38 miles, 23.
23 miles, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Town's only 7 miles long.
It goes like this.
Bruce and Lisa, I wonder what, in capital, if you could speak to the Talcott Road culvert project?
Yep, that's the sheet that's in here that we actually just forgot to talk about.
Well, it's mostly blank.
Well, it is blank. It's the Talcott Road culverts we talked about before. Thanks, Eric, because that is, we
Yeah.
did just let that one go without having any discussion about it. Those are the twin culverts at Talcott Road, just north of the fire station. They're the ones that I've been in here before and discussed that we're asking for ARPA funding on that to line the bottoms of both of those. That will buy you quite a bit, would buy you probably 15 years for those pipes. We have 5 of those large culverts, which really comes out to be, what, 2, 4, there's 2 twins, so there's like 9 altogether. That we've actually did just submit for that hazard mitigation grant, was that what that was? That one fund that they just came out with? Yeah. I submitted for all those to be replaced from Old Stage Road all the way through all the Talcott Road ones for a little over $5 million. Whether we see that money or not, who knows? But the Talcott Road twins are the ones that we haven't done any work to yet, that need to have some remediation on the bottom. Either we line the bottoms of them or we replace the pipes wholesale. The estimate was $1.8 million to replace them. Pretty sure we can line the bottoms of them for probably $500,000. So between ARPA funds, we did put in for a state bridge and culvert money. I'm told we're 20 out of 29 on that list, so I wouldn't expect to see that money this year. Doesn't mean that if we get money put aside for it, that we can't reapply for more grant money next year from that program. So, but they are ones that need to be addressed, and they're fairly critical, obviously, for the school. Probably the fire department likes to be able to go that way too, so.
And as I recall, Bruce, of the ARPA infrastructure projects, this is the one that Public Works would put number 1 on the list.
It is right now, although I would tell you all 3 of them should be number 1.
Other questions? There are no other questions. There is a proposed motion.
Move to approve the Stormwater Fund operating budget for fiscal year 2025 in the amount of $667,130 and capital program for fiscal years 2025 through 2030 as presented.
Is there a second?
second.
Is there further discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it.
You can stick around and go home whenever you want.
Water fund.
Thank you.
And I know Christine doesn't need to be introduced.
Good evening. Thanks for having me here tonight. Here to talk about the water and sewer budget with you tonight. Should have received the transmittal letter, which does highlight a lot of the key points to the budget that we'll be presenting. I will take a few minutes though, to kind of go through some of the points, starting off with the water budget. My pages are not numbered, so I'll just have to bear with me here a little bit. But so start looking at the revenue. Our basic user charge is increasing that. We're increasing that by the CPI, which has been standard practice over the previous years. Our user receipts, we are proposing, the proposed budget before you reflects a rate of $5.80 per 1,000 gallons. That is a no change proposal from last year. The hook-on fees, those are also increased by CPI. And then we are seeing continue to have higher interest rates nationally, which is helping to bring some additional revenue in from interest earned, just helping to offset some of the total cost here. Moving into our expenditures, make note of several increases under the maintenance categories. Those include the service maintenance and repair category. You see a $3,500 increase this year, which is related to the Overlake water testing. The Oak Hill system maintenance line item there is a operation and maintenance of the Oak Hill booster stations. We are seeing an increase there, primarily just through labor and material cost. And similarly with the main repair and maintenance category, we're seeing increases, due to labor and material. So we are asking for an increase in that category. We also have a new capital fund that you'll see in the packet tonight. This is for water system infrastructure. This is intended to provide funding for future projects that are needed to meet future capacity needs and reduce impacts from projects that we have come up with more sporadically, like the Champlain water line capital project that you saw in last year's budget, which was for
Chamberlain Lane.
Chamberlain Lane, yeah. Capital project that was in the fiscal for last year. We do have a decrease in one of the capital for the vac trailer. We're seeing a decrease of just over $17,000 for that capital project this year. That's due to lower costs that we're able to realize from purchasing that the vacuum trailer. That highlights what I wanted to present on the water budget.
I have a question. So, I'm just curious why, it looks like without changing the rate, you're gonna end up with $250,000, almost $250,000 surplus. Don't call it excess revenue over expenditures. I'm just wondering so that would just add to, what's the net position, and I'm just wondering why we wouldn't invest that in something. Why wouldn't we just go ahead and put in the budget an extra payment on some capital project? Is that a choice, or is just, you could put $200,000 towards fire hydrants in this budget and still be net positive, so it just seems like, I'm just wondering why we wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I think it's still back to that kind of net position policy and the town not having that.
Why would you want to
Kind of
add,
defined risk.
you want to add to a net position that's already a full year's, as big as a full year's budget, so.
Yeah, in general, the town hasn't had that policy discussion before. I think it's something to discuss further, but this is just set up as these have been presented in prior years, but it's certainly something to discuss further.
Certainly if we were raising rates, I would say, don't do that, but if your rates are flat and, you're raising more money and we have all these needs, why put them off? It's just.
If you look at the last 2 years, though, we ended up in the hole on water. Water is very hard. It is probably the one that we end up in the hole more than any other one. You have various breaks. We have things like that we have no control over. We can eat up $228,000 in 1 or 2 water breaks if they're severe enough. So it's really not like, I mean, believe me, give me $228,000, I'm a happy person, but it's in the overall looking at a utility and the cost, it's just not a lot of extra money. When you look at the years prior to that, we never planned on being in a hole.
I'm not saying you should lower the rates.
No, I know, I would argue against that
yeah.
vehemently anyway.
Yes.
I would tell you that we should raise the rates every year anyway, whether we need to or
Well, I
not.
think we had a big raise the year before, right? So giving people a little break this year, but, I mean, that's a fair answer, is that we're always gonna try to budget us $200,000 more than we need because we always have emergencies. But that's kind of why you have a net position too, so.
No, right.
Well, I think we really strive for a zero budget
Right, that's what I
bottom
would.
line, but the way that it worked out this year with the, last year we had increases that were there. We also had capital projects that really put demands on that. So when we're looking at this year, support what Bruce is saying, that we wouldn't want to decrease the rates, but maintaining the rates as they are.
Yep.
Even though we're absorbing a 5% increase in the
Yeah,
wholesale,
right.
we're able to have this, this net surplus. But that's going to, again, as support what Bruce is saying, that we have it this year. That's not to say that we're going to have it next year. But I do understand what you're asking. We don't typically pursue a net positive of this type. It's just, it's working out where that's how it's working out this year. And what it looks like when we get to the end of the fiscal year, we hope that it still looks that way.
Yeah.
But there's emergency responses from the fire that can draw on that, water line breaks that can draw on that. There's a lot of variables that really does make this a little bit of an art to try to identify what that rate should be and setting that rate properly.
Okay, I guess we can roll that into our discussion about, like you said, about net positions. It seems like I would budget to zero. I'm used to budgeting to net zero, so if you have extra money without raising your rates, you can invest it where you should and put that down in your capital. But if this is, if our process is we budget to our best knowledge and the pluses or minuses fall where they may, that's just something we should think about.
Yeah, that's been consistent how the town has structured these in past years, but yeah, I think there's some exploration here to see how other utilities manage it with what those benchmarks look like, how much we want to hold in reserve, how much we want to defer to capital. I would just look for just some more time for staff to research that. I think it could be something we look at over the next year here.
Well, we've already started that discussion too. And I can tell you right now that in Vermont, nobody has come up with that number for what that fund should be on a utility side of the budget. Doesn't mean there's not more information out there nationwide, but it's not a number that one engineer threw out, well, it should be 10%. There's not a standard industry number or percentage. Like for the general fund, there's a number that's been decided upon, that's what it should be. That number doesn't exist for utility budgets that we know of right now. Once again, looking into it more this year, maybe we'll find something else out.
Other questions? If there are no other questions, then there is a proposed motion.
Did we do?
Capital.
Oh, I'm sorry. I jumped the gun. I apologize. We
Sure,
did not.
wasn't planning to really get too far into the capital. As I kind of highlighted, there was a new capital project for the industrial Ave sewer bridge, which carries, no, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the sewer, sorry, you're right. I was moving on, Bruce, you're right. So as I highlighted, there's the new capital fund for the water system infrastructure. There was also a decrease in the capital fund for the back trailer, from realizing some of the values in that purchase, and and ownership of that. Happy to answer any questions if there was anything specific to any of the capital.
So the capital programs that are listed in this year's water budget are the same that have been there, with the exception of that extra $25,000 that we put aside just to start building up for other projects that will come up as we go on. They're just not in that 6-year horizon window yet. I mean, that's what our capital program is built on, 6 years. So, next year, we could be shifting where, okay, one that wasn't here this year shows up. And this is just to start adding some money to that to try to keep it so it's not quite such a shock to the budget or the rates.
We were thinking back to the Chamberlain Lane water line last year where we needed that $300,000, and that became part of the rate discussion. So this is to start putting money aside for those projects, like Bruce said. We did a major project in Lamplight a couple years back now, where we got a good funding from the state on that as well. Talking to Bruce, we don't have a project of that scope on the horizon anytime soon, but there's other infrastructure.
There's always other stuff. Like I said, we're looking at a 6-year capital plan, but you're going to be looking at a new water tank. 7 to 10 years. I'd be willing to bet it's more on the 10-year mark, but Williston's growing. We've got to have the storage, and the thing that really governs the storage, we've got plenty of water right now, as long as we don't have any fires. I mean, we got water if we have fires right now too. But that's what it comes down to. We have to keep a certain amount of capacity for those kind of emergencies. So everybody here can see how the town's growing, and every one of those houses and things that are getting built in the water sewer area are taking water. So you're probably looking at another tank in the next 10 years. We have a development that's had 4 water breaks in the past 2 years. One of the ways you look at your infrastructure and whether you should be replacing that infrastructure is the amount of breaks within a certain mile or 2 miles or whatever. And if you keep having the same problem happening, it's time to start thinking about that project as those lines getting replaced. That could be another Lamplight type project. It's not as big, but the thing with Lamplight, we got a 50% forgiveness. Those kind of things, believe it or not, are getting harder and harder for towns like Williston that are more populated, have a higher income level. We're getting less and less of that kind of money because we don't need it. Well, I can tell you, I can still use it. That's what's happening. So that's the other thing you got to start thinking about a little bit.
Bruce, are we replacing these hydrants a few at a time, or are we saving them up for a big push?
Oh, no, we do. Depends on the year what we get for numbers, but we'll do anywhere from 8 to probably, I think the most we've probably ever done was 15 a year.
Okay.
This takes us back to the 1960 hydrants and starts getting them out. And every once in a while, there's some newer that even still need to be replaced, but that's what we're doing.
1960 was a good year.
1960 is not that long ago.
They resemble that.
Exactly. Things are starting to break down. Okay.
Other questions? Now perhaps might be the time for a motion.
I move to approve the water fund operating budget for fiscal year 2025 in the amount of $1,542,895 and capital program for fiscal years 2025 through 2030 as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it.
So much for the easy ones.
Sewer.
Okay.
So moving on to the.
I'm going to leave, Bruce.
So moving on to the sewer budget, just starting off with the revenue side. Again, our basic user charge is increased by the CPI. Under the user receipts, The proposed budget does reflect a suggested rate of $10.20 per 1,000 gallons treated. I believe there'll be some additional discussion about that. We do have hook-on fees, which were increased, again, consistent with the CPI. Those three categories drive a lot of the revenue side of the budget. Under expenditures, we do have a new capital project for the Industrial Ave Sewer Bridge on Industrial Ave, which needs to be scraped and repainted. We have an increase for the pump repair and maintenance under the category for increase, or for, sorry, excuse me. We have an increase under the category for pump repair and maintenance. We are seeing increases in our costs for the repair and maintenance of our pumps and our pump stations. Again, a lot of that's costs and labor that we've been seeing increase in over the last several years. I'm really looking at considering our historical costs and what these maintenance has been costing us over the last few years. We believe additional funds should be allocated to that account. We're also seeing similar cost increase due to pump electricity usage. So the actual cost of operating those pumps is increasing directly from our utility rates going up, or not, sorry, not utility, but the rate for electricity going up, and increased, use of those pumps as we get more people online, more things that go down the toilet, the more those pumps have to operate. And so we're just seeing more operations, more costs associated with that. So looking at the historical cost, we are asking for an increase there. We are actually seeing a reduction in the estimated cost for treating of the wastewater, not so much due for a decrease in the cost of treating it, but because we've been able to identify, and as we continually work to try to find infiltration into the system, we were able to identify at least one fairly significant one, and how to reduce that infiltration rate. Plus the drier weather does help as well. So there's a couple of variables that kind of go into infiltration, but those are two major ones. And so we were able to get an estimated reduction of a little over 64,000 this year, which is also reflected. So happy to see that. Those were the highlights for the revenue and expenditures I wanted to cover today.
Maybe you said this and I didn't quite catch it, but it looked to me like, the expenses are totally reasonable, but we had this huge deficit last year. So we kind of have to raise the rates in order to make up for, so we don't have another deficit. And it looks like it was the treatment line that, from the FY23 to FY24 was, to FY25 is like a huge increase. So
No,
were you explaining that was?
the treatment line is given to us by the Village of Essex Junction every year.
Okay.
They tell us what we're gonna pay for what they expect the flows to be. So that was a 23 actual and 24 approved. Those numbers, like I said, they give us those numbers. We have not gone over that budget for what they've given us. We actually have a sinking fund, for lack of a better term, over there. We call it the rainy day fund, so that if we do go over, we can pull some of that money out of there and it gets paid for, and it doesn't reflect in this budget. And if we stay under over there, they still get the same amount of money. That any extra money there goes into that rainy day fund, which then is for the next year if we end up going over or under. Those line items right there, even though you're right, that's an increase there. We didn't go over budget. That's what was given to us.
Yeah, no, I was just asking, do you know why? It went from 775 to $1.1 million in, a couple of years. And is that,
It's called
is usage or
flows.
is flow?
Uses and, Well, yeah, no, we're paying part of their plant cost to operate the plant. We basically have a third of the plant at this point. So every year when we buy that extra gallons, we get more cost put into the budget that increases those costs to us.
Because I would expect if it was usage, then we'd make that up on the user fees, the user
But it's not,
Receipts.
it's not just all usage.
Yeah, it's
So,
other stuff.
A couple of years ago in FY '23 as well, had a couple new charges come on. We're purchasing additional capacity from Essex Junction over 5 years. We brokered an agreement for that, so the first year of that hit in FY '23. And that's also the year where we started putting funds away for the force main on Industrial Avenue. I think the engineering was complete, so we had a cost estimate at that point.
but none of that's in the treatment line. She was just asking about the treatment.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Just pulling out just that, I see that, it was a larger increase that year. So part of that occurred in that year as well,
I see.
that blended that.
Yep.
One of the things that's actually starting to show just a little bit is, for years, we never increased basic user charges. And now we've started doing that by the CPI every year, and the idea is to get those basic user charges up high enough that then we can keep the actual rates lower, because the basic user charges are paying the offset for the difference.
Is that like a, I don't pay for sewer, so I can ask this question. Is the basic user charge like a flat fee for it to hook on, and then the rest of it's how much you?
So you have connection fees, and anybody
Yeah.
that wants to connect pays a connection fee.
Yeah.
Basic user charge are a quarterly fee, just like your bill, and they're there to pay for the system as a whole, for the lines that are already in the road and those kind of things. That's why we're trying to build that up, but the more we can get out of that then, the less we have to, I mean, it's all looking at the rate is all based on everything else. So the higher we can get those, the rate. What it comes down to right now is we tell people to try to save water. But until we get the basic user charge to a certain level that everybody's basically on the same playing field, they'll save water and basically maybe say that's saving the rate, but you can only save water to a certain level. We're using low flush everything now, I mean, so.
Yeah, the water guys who were here were complaining about it too. We were here last 2 weeks ago. They said, no, we need more water sales. So,
Oh, yeah.
okay. So we'll come back to the rate discussion later, I assume. We'll keep going. Steve, keep going.
I didn't have anything more, if there was any questions.
We're ready to start having that discussion, I believe, of the rate and how that can, the ideas on where money can go to help bring that rate down a little bit.
Essentially, this would be a time for the board to have that discussion. You have to consider approving the budget. It's essentially the expense bottom line, but this would be, say the board wanted to change the rate structure, we would decrease the revenue we're gonna raise in rates and understand that the net position would pick up that revenue at that point as the offset. Suggest the board have that discussion now before considering approving the budget. If you decide on a rate that's different from the $10.20, that will be included in the rate schedule that you approve later on your agenda.
I think I lost you. Tell me that again. So let's say 16% is really too high, and we need to figure out how to cut that number.
I would have that discussion now.
Yeah.
Before you approve the budget, and then we'll include that different rate as part of all the rates you approve, a couple items further in your agenda.
So we'll approve the budget even though it has the wrong revenue in it? Or
Nope,
oh, the revenue will come from somewhere else. like
Yeah, I'd suggest if you want to, if you adjust the rate, we can tell you what that's gonna be to raise in revenue, and then the difference will be made up by the net position of the fund.
Yeah. Which is,
Essentially, it's hookup versus usage. Hookup rate
No,
versus.
it's ARPA versus unrestricted fund balance.
Right.
Yeah, Mike, it all ties back to that rate per 1,000 gallons, so that's the one that's up at $10.20, that's on the draft budget. So there's some thoughts, you could buy down that budget. Our thoughts are if you want to use that, you have to look at net position or ARPA funds and suggest using that towards one-time projects or capital projects that we know are structured. We've brought up the Industrial Avenue Force Main project and the capacity purchase from Essex Junction. We know those timelines for those. Because if you're using it to buy down other parts of the operating budget, you're just pushing that down a little bit on the road, or down the pipe per se.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any problem with the expense budget. I think it's very reasonable. Thank you. I understand having to make up this deficit. I don't know that we need to make it up all in 1 year, especially for something that's not optional for people, as Bruce is pointing out. You're gonna need water and sewer, so I would like to see that spread over 2 years at least. I hope we don't, do we have to, I would like to not decide to use ARPA funds, because I don't want to make those ARPA decisions in vacuum. I think we should make them together, but if we chose not to use ARPA funds for something, say we wanted like I think you had 140, one of your options in here was like, should the board use net position or community projects funds towards the FY25 additional allocation expense of $141,300, it would in turn result in an 8.4% increase instead of a 16.6% increase. I like that, but, well, though even the way you have it written here, I don't have to tell you, yes, we're gonna use ARPA, right? Or yes, I think we should use,
I
would
think
use something else.
If you go and set the rate at that number to the corresponding number to raise, the budget will create a deficit in the budget that the net position would pick up.
Right.
And I think if you then wanted to allocate ARPA funds to that budget, then that would essentially be another revenue stream. You wouldn't have to use net position at that point.
Yeah, that's what I want to do.
Yeah, I agree with Gina. I mean, I would prefer to utilize, to cut that rate, but I would prefer it go towards buying the stormwater, or the capacity over, the force main project, because again, that's, more of an ongoing expense, and just in looking at things we've talked about, like, although we are buying more capacity over several years, there is a finite, kind of timeline on that. So that's my personal preference, would be to use the money towards that. And I feel strongly that I would not like to use the ARPA funds, in fact, because we have been so reactionary in utilizing ARPA funds. And this feels like another reactionary kind of event. And so, ties back into your whole question about the net position, and there's a strong net position for the sewer, but obviously there's also a lot of stuff that could happen too. But
141,000 out of 3.7 million.
right,
It's
I
probably
would
something we-
feel comfortable making that call, but yeah. But above all, I want to decrease that rate for folks. I think, this is a hard year for everybody, and this would be a big jump, so.
So it helps that water isn't going up, or
Yeah.
stormwater.
It does. It does.
Just for a point of clarification, the forest main is it's a capital that has a horizon. It's going to be funded by 2027.
2027,
So
okay.
it wouldn't be an ongoing.
It's not yet.
Yeah, we really try to identify projects that could be completed
Yeah.
with those funds.
And if I'm hearing this discussion correctly, you're talking about just taking 1 year's worth of the money to buy the capacity? And not the next 3 years to make this a net zero? Because all you're gonna do is push this rate to next year. If you only take out one thing, and then we're gonna carry that again next year, all we're doing is pushing this 16% down the road. It's gonna come back to haunt us. The only way to do this and buy this down and not have this come back to haunt us down the road is to either take the capacity purchase, which is $112,500 a year for the next 3 years, whether you take it out of the net position or ARPA or whatever, but pay all that. That's out of the budget then. That won't be reflected in next year's budget. If you don't, then we're gonna be back here next year saying we need $112,500 along with whatever else, and all we've done is push that percentage to the next year.
I think all we're saying is, don't change anything on the expense or on your capital or anything else. This is fine. But you're gonna run a deficit of $141,000 or $150,000, and we're okay with that, because you have a healthy net position that
Yep,
we're
and then-
comfortable with.
And then to Bruce's point, we'll have that expense again next year.
Sure,
so-
yeah, but
so
it'll
then
be at least
decide
spread it
how
over,
to handle
it won't be a 16%, well, hopefully it won't be a
I bet
16%
it will
jump.
be. I bet
No,
it
because
will be.
you'll have cut your deficit, so.
You what?
You won't have a 200, you won't have the same deficit.
Only if the budget works out the way we're saying. It's the same thing as everything else here. We may not end up at a level budget. We may end up a little worse than what we were talking about. Now you're talking about adding $150,000 more dollars to it. So either way you look at it, that's still coming out of the net position. You're just not making that commitment.
What's the net position now?
3 million something, right?
$3.7 million.
So would your preference then be we would just lump sum the sewer capacity purchase and just say, let's buy it all? I mean, we have what, 3 years left?
Yeah.
3 years, so 450, whatever left.
And you buy that, and then that's out of the budget. You don't come back next year and say, we need that money.
Mm-hmm.
And you take it out of the net position or ARPA or wherever you want to say it is.
Yeah.
And, because we could still end up, believe me, we try not to have any budget end up in the hole. But if we do, that money's got to come out of the net position to make the budget good again. That's the whole idea, to have a slush fund, for lack of a better term.
Will they give us a discount for early purchase? I mean, I mean, obviously you all are most familiar with like what your comfort level is with the net position and for things that might arise. So if we did say, let's do the 430, whatever it is, 450, and leaves us with 3.3 million, like that's still a level you all feel comfortable with? I mean, there's not.
When it comes to the sewer budget, I don't know what percentage is comfortable. I mean, worst case scenario, we lose the River Cove pump station.
Mm-hmm.
That's our main pump station that pumps everything across the river.
Mm-hmm.
There's $3 million gone like that.
Mm-hmm.
Whether we can get funding for that, if it's a catastrophic event, a FEMA event or something, we're probably going to end up getting some funding from that. But, I mean, we can have other issues down there. We can lose the pumps. Somebody can cause damage down there. I mean, so I don't know what that number is. We own, and technically, we kind of own a third of a treatment plant now. That's $30 million if you want to try to rebuild a new one. So if we took this 400 some odd thousand out of that position, left that at 3.2 or whatever it is, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it because I don't know what that number is supposed to be anyway.
Right.
But we're not going to transfer that number to next year when we come back in here and add another project to this budget,
Right.
possibly.
Yeah. In working with staff on this budget, the last few weeks, we thought, let's see if we can figure out what that, kind of benchmark might be. And it turned out to be, no one really had that answer for us without some try to do some additional research on it. And we thought about this purchase for the capacity. You could think you're using your net position or this as an enterprise fund, a profit of the fund, for lack of a better term, to purchase additional capacity to then sell more sewer to new users, as opposed to making that purchase with existing users in the system to then create capacity for new users to join the system.
Wasn't there a pop-up in that too, Eric? Something that, in making that purchase, didn't they have some language in there about in year 4 or 3 or something, they could come back and look at? We talked about that when we first did that purchase.
The opener. I'd have to look back at the agreement.
But anyway, so it may make some sense from that standpoint too, to do that.
And if we, and if we pay for it all now, it all comes online now. Like, we're getting it in 10,000
You can use it
increments, but
tomorrow. If you pay for it, it's yours.
right.
Yeah, I think how we structured it initially was to spread out that cost over 5
Right.
years. So I could certainly have a discussion with the city manager in Essex Junction and say, hey, we just want to pay off the rest of what we owe you in fiscal 25. Are you open to that? For tonight, in terms of getting the budget approved here, the board could, as you're discussing, and make that rate $9.47 per 1,000 gallons. It creates that deficit. I can come back in July after I look at that agreement, chat with the city manager some more, and see if we can pay Essex Junction all at once, or we could go ahead and designate some of the net position for those purchases in the next couple of years. We can account for it, or we can see if they'll take those funds right now.
think that makes sense.
And I'm willing to come back and talk about ARPA funds.
So, but conceptually, if we're gonna take, what is it, about $400,000 out to buy capacity, that would remove that from the budget entirely. And then we wouldn't be kicking anything down the road to wait to have the increase that we're really just delaying if we make up for it, if we just,
Right, we're not
Fund the
pushing that
deficit.
number back down the road.
I'm just gonna say, I don't think we're taking the 141 out of the budget, we're gonna put the full number into the budget.
Right.
This is
Right.
but it's,
like a
we're,
business,
Yeah.
you're gonna put it in,
yeah,
and you're gonna
right,
show a deficit.
sure.
Yes,
But that deficit's gonna come out of the fund balance.
yeah,
Right.
yep.
Shirley and I talk the same language, just different.
So the motion for the sewer fund, those numbers are still the same. And then when we get to the rate, we've already kind of decided where we want it to be, and we'll just, does that make, yeah?
I think, yeah,
Okay.
I think that's the consensus.
If I may, if we're increasing the payment to 3, wouldn't the bottom line increase at that point if we're bringing in 3 years worth of payments at that point?
So Eric, I heard you say 947 for the fee, is that the number you're agreeing on? So if I put 947 in, and I put 423,900 in for the capacity, and that would bring you,
I'm feeling really dumb. Where is this, what line item were we talking about?
Is under other expenditures, additional capacity.
so the deficit would be $420,991 that we would be budgeting. Again, that was reducing the user receipt from 1020 to 947, because that's what I heard Eric say, but I didn't really hear the select board come to an agreement on that number, so the number I'm giving you right now is 947 per fee and 3 years of the additional capacity purchasing. Brings us to a deficit of 420,900. So that's how much we plan to use of unrestricted acquisition.
And Shirley, that would increase the budget bottom line, correct, from the 2.445 number?
Which, oh, you're talking about total expense?
On the expense side, if we book those expenses. $2,727,890.
So that's what should be in the motion?
Yeah, if we were gonna do that, that's the number for the motion.
And the 947 number represents an estimated 8.4% increase in the rate.
You want a motion?
Discussion, wanna- a period of meditation perhaps?
A lot of numbers.
Yeah, well, that's why I keep looking at you, because you're very comfortable with numbers.
Love numbers.
Is the board ready for a motion?
Okay. Want a motion? You want me to try the motion?
Yeah.
Sure.
I move to approve the sewer fund operating budget for fiscal year 2025 in the amount of $2,727,890. And capital program for fiscal years 2025 through 2030 as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it.
What's that?
Operating budget is passed.
This is confusing stuff.
Stay up here.
Helps if you're on the right page. I remember when these meetings used to be easy.
Next on the agenda, bike pedestrian path infrastructure, the 20-year progress report.
Excuse me, so, yes, I think you all have a copy of a memorandum I wrote to Eric that updated the information about what we've done since the original bond that was put together back in 2005, what the town has accomplished basically since then. You'll see the completed projects list. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, I think, but what it represents is 4.77 miles of sidewalk or alternative transportation path and $3.2 million spent over the past 20 years. When the bond was originally, when the town originally went after the bond, they identified some projects that this bond was going to go toward. Those projects have all been completed. So then I go on to tell you about two projects that are in the pipeline. One, I would have thought we'd have it built by now, but hopefully by next year, is the 2A project that's going to go from Alpine Lane to Beaudry Lane. That's out there where they're widening the intersection right now on 2A. That'll get us down to Beaudry Lane. Beaudry Lane will take you back to the path that was built through the woods with the bridge behind the Meadow Run property. That project by itself is $369,603. We have a grant for that. The other one that we have a grant for right now is on Industrial Ave to do the project from where the Williston Road Industrial Ave project itself brought sidewalk up to about Avenue A on Industrial Avenue. This grant that we have here will get us up to the Whitecap building. The reason we went for the whole length originally, but you could only get so much money anyway, so it got cut back to at least get up to that point, which is actually pretty significant because the state of Vermont put the Department of Children's and Family Services and things like that in the Whitecaps area without any way for them to get there, with a bus stop down in Industrial Ave and Williston Road, so then they had to walk up Industrial Ave. So anyway, that'll be a good project to that point. We have, and that one is $386,860. So you can see that these sidewalk projects aren't cheap. We have, once those are done, and we literally just put in for the rest of that from Whitecaps to Rosenall Park. We just put in for a bike ped grant. Don't know whether we'll get that or not. If we get that, that'll complete the sidewalk on Industrial Ave all the way from Williston Road to Route 2A. You have to cross the street, but that then would get you a connection from South Burlington to Essex Junction, or all the way back to the Park and Ride, or even through the neighborhoods. You could get back to the village. Not a clean, straight route, but the connections will be there. The other areas we're looking at that we hear the most about is from the village to Taft Corners, and then good old Mountain Mountain View Road, we're hearing about all the time. Mountain View Road did have a scoping study done. That was $3.85 million to do that over there, and that was the chosen alternative. I go back a little bit. Mountain View and the connection from here to Taft Corners are alternative projects. That sooner or later we'll have people around that don't know what that means anymore. We're getting closer all the time.
Closer all the time.
But, so those projects are on the tip, they're just on the tip as unfunded projects. But what that means is they're supposed to be 100% federal and state money, no money from the town of Williston. We have already done the connection on 2A from Alpine to Beaudry Lane was another one of those that was supposed to be 100% state and federal, but we went and got a grant so we can make that connection. Because, you know, at some point you gotta start doing these things without waiting for, but some of these other ones are pretty big ticket items. And Eric knows, you know, we had a little back and forth the other day about somebody asking about Mountain View Road again, and what my comment to Eric was, and I mean, I'm in this boat too, is we've just gotta figure out how to get those projects that were CERC alternative projects funded. And they were promised basically to the town of Williston, and we need to get them off center. I don't know how we do that, maybe Terry does. But,
Bruce, how much could more Mountain View, like, as the I mean, right now we got a whole bunch, it's kind of a slew of developments all on Mountain View Road that are queuing up. Are we having sidewalks or?
they all have to do sidewalks.
And would that cut into this number? That cuts into this number a little bit, huh?
That'll affect that number a little bit, but it's not gonna be enough by the time you get those to start building.
Yeah,
I would say that those numbers are probably still good. I mean,
True.
you're talking a couple miles worth of path or sidewalk on
Yeah.
Mountain View Road. So if a development comes in and does 500 feet of it, it's not eating into that number that much. But, so those are the two biggest areas of disconnect that we hear about. Then there's also the connection, well, then we also had a study done for North Williston Road, Mountain View Road intersection of the Essex Town line, to do something down through there. And this came to the select board for those that were around and was never moved to do anything with, but that cost for that was between 1.5 and $6.3 million. Excuse me, so some of this is a matter of deciding where you really want to do things too. Then, once again, like I said, then on Williston Road, where U-Haul's being built, it's all called the Robert property, that's being built right now. That connection will go from the South Burlington town line up to, there's one lot left from the newest U-Haul building to South Brownell Road, that once that one gets built, they'll be made to put in sidewalk there, and then you'll have that connection too, is from South Burlington over. The funny thing about it, kind of funny, I guess, is that for us, we've got stuff to South Burlington town line now, but on Williston Road, there's nothing on the other side in South Burlington right now. Now, flip it over and go over to Muddy Brook.
Muddy Brook, yeah.
Muddy Brook, Kimball Ave's got path all the way down to Muddy Brook. We brought it over, we come up Marshall Ave a little ways, and in this report, I've stated that we have tried, Public Works has tried twice to get grants to do the project from where that ends up Marshall Ave to connect up to South Brownell Road, and it probably isn't ever gonna happen. We were denied twice because of wetlands. Marshall Ave today through that section wouldn't be there if it isn't there now. There's a very protected piece of wetlands down through there that they're just not letting us touch. So it really kind of makes more sense. Once again, now we're back on Shunpike, but it's still the Robert property that's getting built all the way through, and they're building sections of path all the way up Shunpike Road. So it might make more sense. Our recommendation would be that we focus on trying to get that section of Shunpike finished up, come over the Muddy Brook, you cross onto Shunpike, you're up to South Brunel Road, now you're connected to everything else again. You just can't go right up Marshall Ave to get to, so you go down South Brunel or up Williston Road if you want to get up to Taft Corners or Home Depot or those places. And then, just based on the 2 projects we have, that we have the grants for, I just did some, quick math. And it's really kind of crazy, but it's 1.4 million per mile of path or sidewalk now. It's just out of control. And most of that is just because of all the hoops and bells and whistles. It really is. It's just, but that's what it is. I mean, if you take those 2 numbers and figure it out for the distances they're doing or whatever, it's 1.4 million miles. We used to say it was $1 million to build a mile of interstate highway. So,
It was common knowledge when I was growing up. It was like set in stone. Interstate cost $1 million a mile. Wow.
and you never heard your parents talk about it, complain about it, right?
And as Bruce put on the first page of his report, all those projects completed, the town completed 4.77 miles of sidewalk and path and spent $3.2 million. And we've leveraged grant money throughout the years for that as well. But bring this to the board, it's a really good progress report to look at what the town's been able to accomplish these last 20 years. And it segues into the new town plan. I've talked with the planning department and Public Works about this, where the town's completed these priority lists. We have these last few major projects identified, but as the select board thinks about the new town plan, there'll likely be a recommendation in the transportation chapter to think about the next priority list for paths and the sidewalk segments, including these larger ones we need to complete still. And that all ties back to funding for those as well. So part of the ARPA items that were brought up were sidewalk and path connections. So that would be a good opportunity for Bruce to update the Public Works update the board where those are kind of overall, since the sidewalk bond was voted on about 20 years ago. And think about this next exercise is really a good time for that future planning as well, and scoping and making these decisions on, we can hopefully advocate to get those federal funds that we've been promised. But as it's a common thing we hear about, the connection between the village and Taft Corners, Mountain View Road as well. And, at some point, a decision has to be made.
We're getting to the point now that we have infrastructure in the ground that we have to redo, and we're not even done making the connections yet. I mean, the sidewalk through the village here is all walkable, but it could certainly use, to be brought up to spec a little bit better. It's not unsafe. We keep, doing what we can do to keep it safe, but it'd be nice to replace all this sidewalk, but we still want to make the connection down there. So that's what's happening, just like every other piece of infrastructure. Before we've gotten everything done, we got to go back and do things so that's the other side of it.
It's on the sidewalk committee that did that bond, and I remember George Grecky?
York.
Yeah. He said, it's not that hard. We made these sidewalks in the village. We just took a map and we took a straight edge and we took a pencil. We said, there, go around the tree.
I think Bruce has done a great job on identifying potential grant projects, for paths, and we've got development bills, and I think, like as you said, now we need to just set the town priority of what we're gonna have to build.
Mm-hmm. We do sidewalks on 2. 2 is a state road. Is there complicating factors there, or is there?
Sure, it's a state road. Sure. But that's been identified as one of the routes. The state isn't, they're not anti-sidewalk. They just don't want to be taking care of the sidewalks. So we end up building stuff. They would just as soon as always have right-of-way outside of their right-of-way. But we end up building stuff in their right-of-way, and then we just have maintenance agreements that there are problems forever and ever.
Some of you may remember back to 2005 when the bond vote passed. Gene Jensen was over at Shaker and getting that thing passed, and her Burma-shave signs put down various highways in Williston did the trick. It passed overwhelmingly back in those
Yeah, you
days.
wouldn't have done some of these projects without that bond.
Absolutely not.
A lot of it was used for match, and some of the projects were built without match.
Yeah.
So, you know, it definitely was worthwhile to have that bond.
I think it was Jeff Ferris's idea. He said, why don't we, we're spending about 150 a year on sidewalks. And I said, oh, why don't we just make that the payment and get all the money up front? And that made it a lot easier to get grants, so that was awesome. But we did a lot of smaller
Yeah.
high-use paths, and that was great, but now we're talking about needing $2 million to do, just connect the village to the town. That's a whole different level of funding.
Yep.
Well, the town's done a very good job too, when development comes in, getting them to,
Yeah, yes.
you know, put infrastructure in that way, so.
And I should mention, you know, with the town's goal to plow all the sidewalks and paths, we bought the second plow. It was for the capacity we had today, but as we continue to add these, we'll need a third machine at probably not far in the future.
By the time we have all these paths, there may not be snow.
True.
Well, I'm glad Eric brought that up, because I've said that too. I mean, I said that when we were buying that machine, and it's not gonna be that much longer, because the annex is gonna add a couple miles of road, that's gonna add a couple miles of sidewalk. There's a lot of them coming in the door now that, you know, you get 500 feet here, 500 feet there, whatever. May not seem like a lot, but when your machines are already maxed out, that's another $150,000 piece of equipment, plus you don't have a body sitting there waiting to go in that equipment. So, same story you're hearing from everybody, but
It's such a hard thing. I mean, you joke about the climate, but it's one of our energy goals is to have the connectivity, and we can't, if we don't have the connectivity, we're not kind of meeting that energy and environmental standard, and, then we need the plow, and then so what do you do first? I mean, but.
And it's not just the only thing we have to fund.
Right.
So,
Yep.
Other comments?
great report, Bruce, thank
Yeah,
you.
Yeah, thank you. It's good in looking towards the, 2025 and the town plan, obviously, too, to know where we're at for the next bunch of years, and where do we go from here?
I would suggest that Eric might use excerpts of this in his monthly report that comes out in the paper.
Yeah.
all right, well, thank you all, and I want to tell you all thanks for not being too rough on my two employees, so. I always work them up, tell them how scary you are. So anyway.
We'll try to be scarier next time.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your presentations. Next on the agenda, FY '25 rate and fee schedule, and would this be a good time for the chief to
Yep.
come?
Yeah, you've gone through all of the water sewer through your prior discussions.
Good evening, chief.
Manager Wells, you want me to start, or you want to kick it off?
I can just say briefly, the board approves the user fee and rate schedule for fiscal year 2025, which we'll celebrate the Happy New Year here in a week and a half or so. So it's the board's business to set these rates typically before July 1st. This schedule can be amended throughout the year. I wouldn't say for the utility rates, but mainly for other user rates as things come up. But Chief Collette's prepared recommendations for ambulance service fees. We have a couple new fees that he'll discuss. We haven't included those on the schedule for consideration for adoption tonight, but if the board would like to pursue those fees further, the thought is to come back at a July meeting and discuss those concepts a little more fleshed out after initial feedback. Turn over to the chief.
So the memo that was sent, I assume that was in your attachment in your packet as well. We did not raise our ambulance fees last year. The only rate that we did increase was the paramedic intercept rate, and that was done at the district-wide initiative. So that meant essentially all of Greater Chittenden County, the EMS services that provide paramedic level service. we increased that to $350 for a paramedic level intercept across. So that's billed directly to the agency. So it doesn't get transferred to the patient. We would bill whoever we're intercepting. So if we were to intercept Charlotte Rescue or Richmond Rescue or something like that, that gets billed right to the agency, not to the patient. So that's what we increased. We tried to keep it flat in last year's budget. This year, we look back at CPI, and for us to not take action to try to accommodate, make up for that difference would probably start hurting us because the cost of goods, materials have increased so much. So we're working, at this recommendation is a 3.7% increase on all those fees. When we look at this, we actually poll all of the other agencies in the area to see what their rates are. And we look at that average to make sure that we're not an anomaly and that we're staying within a reasonable expectation of the public. So that poll was done, completed by our administrative assistant, Christy Morrison. Christy got that information back. Of note, the majority of those fees are the existing fees from those agencies. So they're all looking at increasing their fees just as we are today, right? So they haven't adopted their new rates. So even at that, the proposed rate increases that you're seeing here still keeps us underneath the average of all those respondents in that poll. Okay. So that's what that 7% increase is, and you can see that in the breakdown on our proposed fees.
Questions for the chief?
You want to speak about the potential for?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for those of you that were following any of the legislation this year at the State House, House Bill 622 allowed, has the provision for billing treat without transport for Medicaid recipients. Right now, a treat without transport we don't bill for because we don't get reimbursed for it. And Medicare doesn't reimburse that. But the state recognized that loss, it's really a loss every time we go out and do a treat without transport, that ambulance services across the state are being affected by that. So they authorized the treat without transport at the Medicare BLS rate. So that would allow us to, moving forward, to potentially bill at that Medicare rate for a treat without transport. And that ranges from everything from bumps and bruises and administering bandaging and letting them follow up with their primary care provider or recommending that they go to an urgent care so we don't burden the emergency department. Or it can be something like a diabetic wake-up where somebody who is hypoglycemic and we push medication to bring them back around, but it's something that they have lived with, they can manage, and we can leave them there and not have to, again, burden them with sitting in the hospital emergency department. So there's a big range there. If, Gene, I know you like numbers, and so, we asked our billing agent what they're suggesting, what do you think that potential revenue might be looking forward? He did a retrospective look for 12 months, and he looked at all of our electronic patient care reports where we had a 55% validity rate. That means that we entered a patient name, a date of birth, and a set of vital signs, but we didn't transport them. And so that number, with his estimation, is actually going to be between $30,000 and $60,000 of revenue. So, it's hard for us to actually predict what those rates are, and I presented some of the raw data just out of, the sample was small, but just last month to say, what is our Medicaid and Medicare rates for our exposure. So Medicaid last month, about 28% of our customers were Medicaid customers. Commercial insurance was about 20%. Medicare was about 44%. Self-pay was 5.5%, and then government insurance was about 2%. So this treat without transport would affect about that 28% and the commercial insurance. So maybe 50% of our folks that would do that. The discussion there comes up to, we know Medicare isn't going to pay it. So the recommendation would be to have some sort of, so we don't provide an undue burden on a Medicare recipient with a bill that they know is not going to get paid. So we would look for, you know, the consideration of a fee, waiving that fee, because we know it's not going to get paid by the insurance company, by Medicare.
I think that's a great idea, but how would it work nuts and bolts wise? I mean, actually, I'm sorry I don't know this, but I mean, does a Medicaid recipient get a bill in the mail and then forward that, or do you bill?
So the billing agent takes care of all that for us.
Okay.
So the billing agent would know where that bill is going ahead of time when they're sending that out. So they would be able to identify that through their insurance, essentially clearinghouses. They have ways to find out what our insurances are for patients.
Because I guess my concern, and it sounds like we're addressing it, is if a Medicare recipient received a bill because the system sends them out and then cleans up the situation afterwards, that would cause some undue stress when it's going to be waived anyway. And I think I talked to Eric sometime last week that I know that you folks were concerned that Medicare folks might get wind of this and think they're going to get billed.
Right.
If the ambulance shows up, they get treatment, but then the ambulance leaves without them, so they won't call.
Right. Yeah.
But if that's not, I think the number one source, and tell me your thoughts on this, of the misconception that I'm worried about would be people getting a bill. But if they're not, if there's a billing service that's going to nip that in the bud, then that would address a huge amount of that concern.
I'd have to look at the fine details of what that looks like, Ted, but I mean, that would be the theory. And then even if we did erroneously bill that person, to catch that and try to get that waived immediately through policy or the recommendation of legal.
And our thought on this, as it was approved by the governor maybe June 2nd or so, I think we've been monitoring this the whole session. The board's open to this with thinking about that Medicare waiver as well. I'd want to just consult with the town attorney on how we should structure that just from a policy standpoint, and we can bring that back to you in July to consider adoption of the fee at that point.
Am I correct when you said 44% of patients were Medicare?
For last month, yeah, 44% of our patients that we saw.
In the
Population.
Sir.
the Medicaid patients wouldn't be responsible for anything financially, though. It would be state Medicaid.
Correct.
And it's Medicaid, not Medicare, because Medicaid is state and Medicare
Medicaid
is
state,
federal.
Medicare federal, correct.
Well, I think there's a reason that this was put in place at the state, well, we should take advantage of it. I do hesitate for anybody in town to not, to be afraid of calling if in an emergency, because they don't think they can pay, but,
I'm not super concerned about that. I just was concerned if,
Yeah.
People started getting bills and they started freaking out.
yeah. Good.
Okay, we'll kind of polish this and consult with legal and bring something back to you, probably July timeframe or so, to hopefully capture this early in the fiscal year.
Do you want to talk about the procedures fees as well?
Yeah.
So the other consideration would be allowing our billing agent to move forward with procedures fees. So right now, we don't bill for individual procedures like an IV or oxygen or defibrillation or intubation. Those are costly procedures. They're allowable to be billed under Medicaid, and we currently don't do that. And when we did our survey, we found that neighboring agencies like Essex Rescue and Richmond Rescue with some exceptions on Richmond. I think they bill for IVs, but maybe not defibrillation, but don't hold me exactly to that. But the other agencies, if they respond into Williston and they transport, they're getting billed those procedure fees anyway. So they, just because of the ambulance that showed up at their house that day, they would get a higher bill than if Williston Fire Department's ambulance showed up. And so again, our billing agent had recommended, again, this is kind of leaving, this is allowable under the Medicaid billing and also under commercial insurance. So again, there's more revenue there that could be had.
You said commercial, you just mean like Blue Cross Blue Shield?
Exactly.
Commercial, yeah.
Our thought on that one too, there's a menu of fees that could be applied, and if the select board's interested in having us assess those fees, just how granular you want to be with it. Do you want to see that full schedule, or do you want to see the schedule initially? And then my thought is the chief could be designated to make adjustments as he or she see fit, as we establish this in policy.
Yeah, I certainly don't want to have it an annual, let's go through, let's see what all fees we're going to,
Yeah.
you know, I don't have that discussion every year. I guess I would want to be consistent with, you know, neighboring towns and not entirely unreasonable. I can't think of a reason in my head why we wouldn't want to do that, but there might be a good reason out there. I can't think of it, but,
I think it's also reflective of the high level of service that is provided from our professional, like, EMTs and our professional paramedics. I mean, that's who we have working for us. And, you know, when professionals treat you, you expect, I mean, you go to the hospital, you pay for everything, right? And, you know, I mean, I think that's, yeah, that makes sense to me that those services would be paid for.
Well said, Britta.
well, you do pay for taxes, though.
Right. Yep. But it's back to the sidewalk conversation, you know, our rates, you know, taxes are gonna be higher for, you know, we're eating a lot of the costs for these things as a community right now, rather than billing the,
Insurance.
you know, the insurance. Right.
But I could suggest we could maybe bring back to the board an initial list for FY25 for these per service additional fees, and then you know, from there, or could consider a motion to adopt that fee, and then moving forward, we could have some language to designate the fire chief to make changes as seeing fit, consistent with other agencies in the area. Something like that.
Sounds good. Okay.
Those are all the ambulance fees, I believe. The other pieces on your fee schedule, many things unchanged. I'll highlight, I don't have it on here yet, but our EV charging station, we are in the park, is ready to get energized, I guess to say. We're gonna try next week kind of a soft launch. We have to set it up on the software back end. But we're going to initially have it for, you know, a week or two with just recouping the cost of electricity. But the Energy Committee is going to come up with a recommendation for the Select Board to consider of how to set a fee structure for that charging station. There's things you can think about where you want to charge like a use fee per hour or something, and avoid people parking their car there and just plugging it in for hours and hours at a time. So they didn't have a quorum for their last meeting, so they weren't able to make it for this agenda, but I think they're meeting next week, so I should have something for you by your next meeting.
Okay.
Not on the schedule here, but included with a separate memo with a sheet is the planning and zoning fees. Matt included them in his memo, outlines a couple of recommended increases, primarily to recoup staff time for services, increasing the maximum permit fee cap for larger projects. If you'd like Matt to speak to any of those in greater detail, I can text him and have him come over. If not, there's two motions for you to consider for both of these fee schedules this evening.
What's the consensus of the board? Do we have questions for Matt, or are we comfortable proceeding?
That looked good.
Fine. Yep.
So, if that's the case, are we ready to start adopting?
Are we changing the sewer from 10:20 to 9:47?
Yep, correct. Yep.
Chief.
Thank you, chief.
Thank you. So do we need to, in the motion, reflect that?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
Greta, your turn. You can do the hard ones anyway.
So I want to make sure the language, so, adopt it, the fee schedule as presented, with the exception that the sewer rate will be $9.47.
Yeah, or you could say the fee schedule, as amended with the sewer user charge to reflect $9.47 per 1,000 gallons of use.
Oh my gosh. Eric, do you have that written down?
What he said, second.
What Eric said. Okay. Okay, move to adopt the fiscal year 2025 rates and fee schedule as amended to reflect the sewer usage,
User charge.
user charge of $9.47
Per 1,000 gallons.
per 1,000 gallons of use.
Second.
Is there discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it.
I can do the next one, easy. Move to adopt the permit fee schedule for fiscal year 2025 as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have that as well. Great.
So we'll bring back those ambulance fees when those
Yeah.
are set,
Yeah.
the EV charger fee, and then you will get to set your tax rate at the next meeting as well. The grand list is finalized, grievances are next week, so we'll have that rate recommendation for the board for July 2nd. Then we get to print the bills, get the bills out the door. The legislature settled on the yield yesterday, so we'll get the education tax component figured out there as well. I've asked the town assessor, I think he's available on the 2nd, Bill Himmon, to give the board kind of a grand list overview as part of that discussion. We try to do that when we can with the tax rates. After that, we'll be ready to go in the new fiscal year.
Wow. So next on the agenda, select board policy priorities and objectives for the business year.
So I went back and reviewed from your retreat last November, my notes and the minutes on that. I put together a brief memo in your packet. The retreat, the board had consensus, the highest ranking areas for exploration and policy work were centered on public safety, homes and people, and economy and jobs. Also agreed that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a lens that's important to utilize for every public policy area. Retreat discussion was also focused on looking at Williston's growth and the services needed as the town grows, and proactive and reactive governance. So we're also discuss and looking at data and information to make decision making. As I took that lens from your retreat feedback and looked at the draft of the policy priorities and implementation strategies, I certainly saw a number of those items that were reflected of those goals that the select board had raised in the retreat. I can certainly do any further research on this or make any amendments the board's interested in. If you're considering adoption this evening, one thing you could think about is, of these different items, are there any kind of, put it at the top of your list, Eric, type of items? Don't have to decide on that this evening either, but we're working to advance these that are in process the best we can. But if there's something you certainly want to direct the manager to put as one of the top priorities coming up, so it's always helpful to get your direction.
So I'm wondering if the first thing we should consider is the list accurate? I've gone through it, seems fine to me. But if there are changes to be made or different classifications, now would probably be a good time. And if that's not the case, then I think the next thing might be to have a discussion about what the town administration should focus on as between each of these. And again, if that's a discussion that is people want to think about it a little bit, we can do any number of things. We could either set this off for another meeting, or we could adopt it and then come back and give further guidance. It's really the board's discretion.
I wouldn't mind adopting and discussing further priorities within it, since we've been looking at this a few meetings
A
now.
little bit.
Yeah, I imagine, I mean, we'll be doing, now, once we have these in place, you know, quarterly or whatever, check-ins to see, you know, progress monitoring, where we are on each of these things, and if there's things to be added. I mean, obviously, it's a, you know, a work in progress, so.
I could potentially kind of build this as an appendice to your quarterly report.
Yeah.
And you'd mentioned maybe making some things with links to documents in,
Yeah.
Dropbox. So we could add that as appendix as one way to do it.
Yeah, that would be great.
Where we will be taking the most action will be under the items identified as discussion, correct?
I think it probably depends on how you mean that. I mean, the stuff that's in process is gonna be the stuff that's, I think is gonna be the most active. The stuff that we have to consider, you know, probably would be the stuff that's identified as still either identified or discussion items.
In process or other, is the planning and zoning department, you know, or planning commission or
Yeah.
things that they're working on?
But that will inevitably be coming before us for various decision points or updates or
Correct.
whatnot, yeah.
Yeah, good example, there's a town plan. Like the planning commission will transmit that to the select board. And their goal is to get a draft, I think, this fall. The board has to adopt it by August of 2025, so there'll be a good chunk of time to go through that.
When is the village master plan? Same time?
I think they're pretty close on that. Probably get, I think it's close to being complete. I think they'll get back into that after stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty close.
Okay.
If there is no burning discussion, there is a motion recommended.
So I'd move to adopt the select board policy priorities and objectives for the business year ending at town meeting in 2025.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. So that would bring us up to the manager's report.
Couple things from my written report this evening. The board's request for a tour of the wastewater treatment facility. I checked in with the superintendent with her availability coming up. She does have availability July 16th and August 20th. Or could consider convening a meeting over there to start at 5:30. It's probably about an hour or so to go through it, and then recess and convene here at 7. See if either of those dates work for the board, if there's interest in setting that up.
20th of August would be preferred for me, but I can make the 16th work if that's better for everybody else.
I think either of those sound fine to me.
I'll try to make it in
I can make either one.
I'll go for August 20th. And I'll wanted to set that one first, and then I'll follow up with the Champlain Water District, and we'll find a time for that, probably in the fall, and we can get that set up. Reminder on the next agenda will be the community project funds, formerly ARPA discussion. I've got those sheets essentially finalized. I'll plan to send them out to the board this week, so you have them for a period of time to have available for any notes and things. I can send, actually, I'll email it, and I can print a hard copy too for anyone that wants a hard copy. Just let me know.
One thing on that was, when I was looking at it, I was thinking like, I have to find my notes because I can't remember what the, you know, you've got it nicely succinct, so it's all on one page, and it's like, what was this, and why did I not prioritize it before? So, we've been talking about these for so long.
I can reattach my report with that too. That goes into some further detail on the narrative.
Yeah.
Then I had, we did the Talcott Road culvert tonight as for Public Works, but I had them flag kind of their top three with that, the meter read system and the third pump at the River Cove pump station as kind of their top three to be thinking about as well. I included, VLCT does a good year-end legislative report. I haven't made my way through it all yet.
Oh, thank you.
I was kind of waiting till the veto session wrapped up too, but staff is reviewing that. There are a number of things that affect our local government here, including some additional training that will be required moving ahead, some open meeting law items with recording meetings and hybrid meetings. So we're kind of unpacking all that, and we'll make sure we're in compliance. Some things have July implementation dates, but I'm not worried that there'll be people trying to make sure following everything. I think we have a pretty good sense of it going into July, but Erin in the manager's office, she's taking a look at that and going to follow up with all boards and committees for compliance there.
Given yesterday's very robust veto session, kind of, will they update their report, I assume?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
what I heard. We're talking with
Okay.
with Ted Brady that they got this big report out and they were gonna.
It was
probably have
busy.
an
It was
addendum.
busy yesterday.
So I'm sure they're still unpacking.
Yeah.
Right now. The Act 250 bill that was approved in the veto session, we had talked a little bit about concern with language for TIF districts that may Williston not be able to partake if it considered it. Talking with Matt Belanger today, that language didn't make it into the bill, so that concern was addressed. The designations changes in there, Matt wasn't overly concerned with how they landed to affect Williston. So overall, that bill landed, a big complex bill. I think it's overall not having any detrimental effects for our community.
There's one just because we haven't really talked about it, but just because I got to page 2. Municipalities were granted new authority to regulate outdoor cannabis growing operations. I think that would be an important one to, personally, I would think that might be an important one for us to think about. Should be sooner rather than later. Though it's not on our priorities list to approve, so it may not happen.
Can always be added to.
Policy
We'll look
in
into
place.
Yeah, because you couldn't, municipalities didn't have any authority to say yes or no as to where people would have a cannabis growing facility. Now, that's all I have is one sentence, but if we do, I think that would be important to think about, have somebody in town think about.
Thank you for stating that.
Just want to give public recognition to our Williston and Bloom folks. I think it's a small but mighty number this year, including our staff member Lynn Keefe. They do a great job with the planters and the gardens out front in the village. I saw one of our volunteers, it was this afternoon, or I was like, oh, it's really hot out there, and I saw them filling up to water the plants to make sure the plants weren't affected. So it's been a great program for a number of years, and it's possible because of volunteers that make that happen. And just to mention, with our heat wave we're experiencing, we're doing a lot of public outreach in our different channels, encouraging folks, just good information in general for staying safe. Reminding folks the library is open during its regular hours, has a cooling center. It's open till 8 p.m. tomorrow night. It's Wednesdays, it's late night. I think that's going to be the peak as well. So public safety is monitoring it. They're keeping me updated, and if we need to look at any other facilities, we're poised to be able to pivot to stand those up quickly, working with the partners at the school. So I'll check in with the chiefs in the morning and see how today went. Haven't heard anything concerning so far. So that's all I have for manager's report.
Okay. Other business?
A couple other businesses. So I had an inquiry. There's for 4th of July, a request from a major political party to have a tabling on the green after the parade. We have policy where we let nonprofits use rooms for meetings, but as looking at town policy, we didn't really contemplate this type of request. So I want to get the board's just direction on that, because I didn't have any policy to go off of for that request. in general, just, I think it's having a table and a presence of a political party on the green after the parade.
We've had registration tables on the green years ago from political parties, but
I think I'm okay with it.
Yeah, me too. I'll assume, but, yeah. I guess it's, we could play hypothetical games about, some sort of, crazy stuff happening, but maybe we should cross that bridge if we ever get to it. I don't think we ever will. So I don't see a problem with it.
Well, I think, if we're saying political parties it's an election year, political parties, not just, registered political parties. Like if we kind of banned it, if we're worried about letting anybody have a table on the green to do whatever they want. That could be a pretty narrow thing if that's more comfortable.
Well, we don't really need to have a specific policy for this decision, though. Right?
No, I think just, in general, nonprofits have had tables there, but just the thought of having a political group there wasn't something I just had clear guidance on in policies. So just to run it by the select board to make sure there was no objection to that. I thought of it since you're meeting tonight, just to get your feedback. I just had to make a judgment call on it.
At the farm, we allow, candidates to come, but we require that they have a tent, table, chair, and that they're not able to go through the crowd, because we want it to be a family affair. We don't want them to, we have people go to them if they have questions. We don't allow them on our PA system at all. We just have parameters. We allow it, we just put in parameters. I don't know if there's any parameters we might want to put in place.
I don't think so, because it's public space and anybody could walk around and try to talk to anybody else using their First Amendment right to, hey, can I talk to you about political issues? And people are free to say no. So
We're just not allowing maybe a PA system or something.
if it hasn't been requested, I don't think we need to cross that bridge. But yeah, I agree with you. I wouldn't want to see that.
I'm just trying to be a devil's advocate, think of something.
No PA systems, no laser light shows. But if the request is made, we'll probably shoot that down.
Okay, I'll pass on that feedback.
I'll go along with the majority.
Then I just had you recall you approved a first-class liquor license for Casa Grande, the new Mexican restaurant opening on Marshall Avenue. They've requested now a third-class license.
I was wondering about that. And I was like, I'm not gonna question, obviously, their liquor licenses, but I was wondering about that.
So the staff has no objection to this. The board would consider a motion.
Okay. Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve.
Is there a second?
second.
Is there further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 The ayes have it.
And the last is a catering permit from El Gato for at the Isham Farmers Market. Their first night tonight, they're up there. Ted approved this yesterday with me. I spoke to him. Staff has no objection, permitted for consumption on the site. I spoke with the owner about their plans for service, and everyone is trained from the DLC. So staff has no objection. They were going to submit a catering permit for the rest of the nights of the farmers market through the summer. If the board wants to consider a catering permit for El Gato at Isham Farmers Market for the remaining of the farmers market season.
Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those abstaining? One abstention? The ayes have it.
That's it.
Okay. Final thoughts on agenda items from this meeting? Anything to circle back around on? Okay, then next, there is an anticipated executive session, so we would need a motion on that.
I have not memorized it, Jean.
Come on.
I know, I'm really sorry, but, move to find that premature public knowledge regarding a contract under discussion the town is a party to would clearly place the town at a substantial disadvantage And further move that we enter executive session to discuss a contract under Title I, Section 313A1A of the Vermont statutes, and invite Town Manager Eric Wells and Planning Director Matt Boulanger to join the discussion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
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 The ayes have it. We are going to be in executive session and we will not return to